big story of the day. Yes, the Prime Minister is in Italy, he's in Puglia. He's already had these two bilaterals with the French President as well as the UK Prime Minister. He's also met the President of Ukraine. And of course, amidst the dark clouds of the Ukraine-Russia war, there is going to be the push made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi over several issues and over several topics that India holds dear with regards to all these G7 nations and their heads of states that have arrived at the venue. Let's start off our conversation. Joining me on the telecast is Ambassador Manju Seth. And Ambassador, of course, the focus remains on the Ukraine war. It is amply clear that after the release of the tranche of $50 billion as a loan to Ukraine to fight its war against Russia, there is nothing more that is extremely important as this for the G7 nations. Now, amidst all this, when the Prime Minister is especially invited by the Italian Prime Minister, there is also then the stature that the Prime Minister holds, India being kept in regard as a nation that is important for the G7 nations, that is important for the Western world. But more importantly, these sidelines bilaterals that are happening and the communication and photo ops that are happening, the optics that are being sent out to the world are of perhaps more importance.
It is, after the Prime Minister's re-election for the third time, this is his, first visit. But of course, as you are aware, India has been participating in previous G7 meetings as well as an invitee, as an outreach partner. And this time, again, we've been invited along with a number of other countries as an outreach partner. But yes, India being included in the list of outreach partners is definitely an indication and an acknowledgement of India's importance in the world economy, in world affairs. And also, it's being, a strong proponent of G20, as we saw in G20, proponent of the Global South, as we saw in the G20. And so it is an important country, cannot be denied, and that the world is acknowledging that. And at the G7, as we have been seeing, the bilaterals have been taking place, and many are slated to have taken place. 3 have taken place, and some more will be taking place with all the other leaders. And I'm sure all important bilateral meetings, all bilateral issues will be discussed. And I foresee a kind of continuity in our relationship, even though, as many experts have pointed out, that the French president has ordered parliament elections and as has UK. But definitely, I think vis-a-vis India, there is, and from India's side as well, there is this element of continuity in our bilateral relations with all the important countries and all important countries and the advanced countries who are members of the G7 in particular. And of course,
absolutely. Rupinder Sachdev, again, taking forward the point that Ambassador Seth put out, that, irrespective of whether the French President Emmanuel Macron is at his position in the coming months after the snap polls take place, the same is the case with Rishi Sunak. Is there a change in policy that India can witness in terms of how UK treats India after the elections take place, and if Conservatives don't come to power and Rishi Sunak is ousted from his position and the Labour Party takes control?
Interesting question. See, in a big picture, I think what we can say and look forward, irrespective of whosoever wins the elections in the UK or France for that matter, which is going to the polls, or wherever Germany is headed, what Prime Minister Modi is taking to the G7, and he's pitching the India story. We are the largest by population, we are the largest by market, we are growing at a good economic rate. So any whichever government in the G7 would benefit by investing in India or by pushing or encouraging investments into India. So I think that that perspective would very much be there. And as you mentioned, and as Ambassador Seth has mentioned, there is a continuity in that. Couple of snippets, interesting points, I would say. On the one hand, Modi ji is the senior most leader in this gathering, by the way, right? All of these others have been heads of states or governments for the last 4 or 5 years or something. He's been there since 2014. So in a way, there's a term, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps in Delhi, for example. So maybe he could be the dean of the G7 in Puglia right now. I mean, that's on a lighter note, but it reveals something also about India, India's continuity and India's growth. There are definitely, referring to Ukraine, there will definitely be pressure on India to increase sanctions on Russia, to distance itself even more from Russia. We will, I think, push back on those pressures absolutely. From our point of view, I think the biggest worry for India, one big worry for, and G7 being an economic forum, is the fact that world over, and especially in the G7 countries, trade protectionism is rising. All of these countries are heading that way. I mean, the US is clearly saying they're going to raise tariffs across the board, especially if Trump comes. Even Biden is saying. And the rise of the right in the Europe, all these governments which are facing the right nationalist movements rising, they're all oriented towards rising protectionism, raising trade barriers, which, I mean, definitely hurts us. It hurts them also, but it hurts us also. So these be some, overall narratives. And then, of course, there are the bilaterals, which you are obviously highlighting.
Right, absolutely. Gautam Mukherjee, these are optics for global media to absorb and put out. So today on all the news channels and media websites and digital platforms and social media, it's all being put out. Yesterday it was Prime Minister Meloni who was meeting all the G7 leaders. Today it's Prime Minister Narendra Modi with those bilaterals on the sidelines. Now, what is the message that goes out to the world, especially when we have the G20 where there has been an effort by the Western nations to take over the narrative and push it towards their interests, whether it is Ukraine and now whether we talk about the Gaza-Israel war. We saw this in G20 leader summit that took place, and India made its effort and seen across the globe that it was global south on which the focus needed to be. Meanwhile, when G7 leaders meet, they are European and North American leaders, can there be a possibility, number one, of India becoming part of the G7 and maybe G7 becoming G8, G9, I don't know. And can these priorities then be altered a little bit for India to represent the global south in G7?
Well, I think the significant thing is that from even before the elections were concluded, Meloni did invite Modi to the G7 in the outreach section. And Modi made the effort to turn up even for a day to meet the G7 leaders. So to that extent, India has been singled out as worthy of being called to the G7. Whether we will be invited to join the G7 in due course, I cannot at this moment say. But it is a meeting that we are attending at an important juncture. I think possibly the Gaza war is coming into a permanent ceasefire. No talk yet of a two-stage solution or a two-state solution, except in certain quarters. But even if a ceasefire is at last achieved, UNSC certainly wants it. I don't think Israel is against it. Hamas is reluctantly coming to the table as well. That means one of the two wars that are plaguing the world could be coming to an end, if not a permanent end, at least something of an end. As far as Ukraine is concerned, it will have to head pretty much the same way. It's a ceasefire followed by discussions and so on. Okay. I do not see the idea of pressing India for more sanctions and the like, because sanctions, with regard to Ukraine, I mean, because sanctions in Ukraine, that is yesterday's story. That ship has sailed. It is now a process of how to bring this to a close without compromising Ukraine's interests too much. Okay. India is included in this insofar as it is allowed to or invited to hobnob with the G7 at this point in time. I think the most important bilateral, as usual, will be a pull aside with the US, President Biden, and of course the host, Meloni, and however many others. It's a good continuity gesture as Modi enters his third term.
Okay, absolutely. Talking about Prime Minister Narendra Modi entering his third term, Ambassador Manju said, this is also the first time that the Prime Minister is meeting the heads of states of foreign countries after he has won the election with a decisive margin. The NDA has come out and formed the government for the third term. Now, something similar has also been witnessed with the Italian Prime Minister winning the election in Italy. Meanwhile, when you take a look at the fate of US President Joe Biden, incumbent elections are going to take place. We don't know which way the tide will be, Republicans or Democrats. Something similar in France, United Kingdom as well. There are going to be elections taking place in July this year. So, obviously, a congratulatory note, congratulations that are in order, and therefore the leaders, hugging it out, shaking hands. They know that if they come to power, it is going to be Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his stability that he has formed in the last 10 years that will then extend to the next 5 years. And hopefully these leaders remain in their positions, and if not, obviously, the change of guard.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned before, India has become an important economic player. And whoever, therefore, is in power in any of these countries, France, of course, he will remain, president will remain, but I think the parliament elections are taking place. And if the other opposite party is in the majority there, it'd be more difficult for President Macron to function and to push through policies. And so that will be a problem. And in the US also, we have seen before that there were excellent relations between India and US even during the Trump term and the previous term, and even in the UK, we've had fairly good relationship with whoever has been in power, because this relationship is not dependent only on the leaders, but also on the interests that are the perceived interests by their governments, by their countries, by their leaders, whoever is in power. But yes, of course, if all the current leadership is back in power, it will of course be another positive thing, because for India already they have a certain rapport, they have a certain friendly sort of relationship between the leaders, and that contributes and leads and goes a long way in further strengthening the relationship. And of course, if it isn't there, you have to see the individual interests. If it is in their interest to be with India, they will all be with India, whichever leader is there. Okay. And I think it is in their interest, and it's in our interest too. So it will be a win-win situation, I think.
Okay, all right. Coming back to you, Rubinder Sachdev, about Ukraine, how can India at this point in time contribute in the peace process?
$1 billion question. I would feel, and this is my personal opinion, India can contribute in a big picture perspective. But at present, I think India cannot contribute unless India is invited by the players, let's say the Ukraine, which essentially means the West, to play a role. The point is the Ukraine-Russia war is stuck in so much of deep embedded interests that no amount of goodwill, if India were to say that, we have the goodwill, you have to have a leverage in a negotiation, right? You have to be able to give something, take something, hold something back, bluff, blackmail, whatever, right? We do not have, I think, those kind of chips to play. So therefore, at this moment, I think, but yes, the point is, there will be a time will come when Ukraine and the West will be tired, when Putin will also say, backdoors, okay, yeah, fair enough, we can make some kind of a deal. At that point, if an honest broker is needed, then yes, India could play a role. India should be invited at that juncture when the West is willing to settle for a deal. if the West thinks that and invites India to play a role, when it itself is not willing to make a deal, we will not be able to arm twist Putin into accepting what the West is telling us would be the right deal, right? Neither will we do it, nor would we be able to do it. So I think wisdom for us would also lie in keeping up the positioning that we have right now, meeting Zelensky. And I think the message from Zelensky meeting, which Prime Minister gave, again, was that, we believe in settlement of ideas and disputes through discussions. Okay, this is not the era of war. So I think that should remain, and a time will come when naturally we could be invited to lead the mediation.
The limited leverage that we had, that was at the leader summit, G20 leader summit, Gautam, that we were able to build a consensus. There were certain omissions that had been made in the joint declaration, and all G7, G20 nations came together. And that was looked upon as something of an achievement for India to do as a mediator. And that's the limited leverage that we had in resolving the situation, at least coming to a consensus amongst all nations, including Russia and China.
Well, I think as far as the Ukraine situation goes, the world recognizes that we are close to Russia without being in the Russian-Chinese camp. And as such, that is a very valuable asset in a negotiation. The Western powers don't really need India to negotiate on their behalf. Neither does Zelensky and his bid to, unrealistically, I feel, get all his territory back. But India can certainly put across a point of view to Putin's Russia and be heard. Whether it will be accepted in full, it depends very much on what India chooses to put across, what India is willing to put across. Now, the commonsensical viewpoint, which ex-President Trump, possible new President Trump, has already said, is that Russia gets to keep pretty much the territory it has taken and maybe a little extra, and the war can be settled on that basis. I don't think Biden is following quite the same line, but realpolitik will mean that that is more or less the basis on which the Ukraine war can be settled. Now, I think India can certainly put this across and get some kind of positive and constructive response from Russia on it.
Ambassador said, we've seen that in all likelihood, the Gaza-Israel war is, I think, more or less going to come to an end with a ceasefire talks. The proposal, I think, barring a few points that Hamas has raised, I think the hostage release has mostly happened, maybe just a few of them that still remain with Hamas. But that seems to be coming to an end, which is the war that has lasted for so many months. On the other hand, it is the Ukraine-Russia war that continues, and it has led to expending of resources from either side. And Europe has borne the brunt of it. Germany has borne the brunt of it. In a situation such as this, can there be any reconciliation? Because right now, it looks like a stalemate, and a stalemate that will go on for, I don't know, it could go on for another year.
Absolutely. The Ukraine and Russian war, I think, is the main party or the main is not the main player, should I say, is not really Ukraine in all this. So as mentioned by Mr. Gautam, it is impossible for Ukraine on its own to negotiate, or for any country to negotiate on their behalf or mediate. It has to be the West, the US and all the other European countries, NATO, which need to decide to end this war. Otherwise, this is just going to continue. There was a report that today that President Putin has said that he's ready to end the war right now, provided Ukraine gives in writing and undertaking it will not join NATO, which has been the demand right from the beginning, and that whatever it has, it will get to keep, whatever territory is under its occupation. Now, I think on that, if Ukraine even thinks of doing it, it's going to have a big repercussions for it within the country, for the government within the country. But if they want the war to end and all this mindless killing and mindless, missiles and war going on endlessly, I think they would have to find some via media and accept it.
Okay.
There is kind of tiredness. Everybody's tired. And I think only when everybody's tired and everybody's, and eventually Ukraine decides that it cannot put up with any more destruction of its people and killing of its people and its country, I think then only maybe we can look forward to a solution.
Rupinder Sachdev, do we see that there is going to be a long-standing Cold War once again between United States of America and Russia playing out?
Thank you, Megha. Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, we may even use some other word other than Cold War. The point is, you said the word reconciliation, right? Will there be? On the one hand, let's split it into two. It could be that some time could come when the Ukraine conflict could be, let's say, frozen or paused on whatever terms, right? We could perhaps imagine that. But the other half of the reconciliation between the West and Russia will not happen.
Yes.
Europe is dividing away, cutting away Russia from all interconnections, even going as far as, relations in cultural exchanges, sports and all. The gas exports which were going from Russia to Europe, ever since the pipelines have been stopped, Europe is investing tens and tens of billions of dollars in constructing new landing port facilities for import of LNG tankers. So Europe is laying the infrastructure, preparing the infrastructure for a total break away from Russia.
Right.
So that reconciliation with Russia, to me, it seems will not happen. And so therefore, that will be the Cold War that you refer to, or could be whichever kinds of war, which will absolutely be there. It'll be like, let's say, again, the Iron Curtain in a way. This time, the Iron Curtain maybe has been put up by the West. So Russia has been totally cut off from the Western mind. Europe is,
Okay, all right. Coming to you, quickly a comment from you, Gautam, before I wrap this up. Now, there have been, strong actions, announcements, developments that have taken place. Number one, before President Putin was to arrive for the G7 summit, a day prior to that, there has been an announcement that there were over 300 sanctions, additional sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. As soon as the first meeting of the G7 member leaders happens yesterday, the first announcement comes from there is that there is going to be a $500 billion loan that is going to be additionally provided to Ukraine, and this loan is going to be gathered, the $50 billion are going to be gathered from the frozen assets of Russia that are in hold of America and their allies, the NATO allies. Now, a direct message being given out, there was hope in the world that as hasty as the Biden administration has been in ensuring the war is de-escalated in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza, this is clearly not visible when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Well, I think irrespective of this saber rattling right now, because it's more saber rattling than anything else, you can give a lot of money to Ukraine, but it is, and weapons for that matter, and a second lot of Predator drones and more F-16s, but it's still going nowhere. I think backroom talk has to come to the idea that, look, how much of money can you give us for our reconstruction? We have been reduced to rubble and stone. And once this war is brought to a ceasefire, Ukraine has to be rebuilt. How is the West going to help us? As far as Russia goes, for it to say that I want a guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO is a fairly empty thing. Maybe they'll give it, but they've given this sort of assurance before, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and have not kept it. With all the surrounding countries who were not part of NATO, now part of NATO, this is a direction that Russia can do very little about. Okay. And I think Russia knows it. But to bring it to a conclusion and get some territory that they've already conquered, perhaps a little bit more for strategic reasons, is entirely possible.
Okay.
And
okay.
I
All right.
don't
Also keeping in mind that Russia is a bigger adversary and a difficult enemy to tackle vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip conflict, and you have Hamas, the terrorist organization, and Iran, which is sponsoring it. Yeah.
Yeah. One more last thing I want to say is I do believe that there will be an opportunity to draw Russia back into the Western camp. This has been missed. They've been pushing Russia into China's arms. This might be reversed, particularly if there's a change of guard at the White House.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.